On this edition of What's in a Game, we're going to react to some of the group stage Olympic Games that just finished before we preview the knockout round and make some predictions for those single game elimination games, which will be fun. We'll talk about some other Olympic sports that we've been finding interesting and then react to Draymond Green's comments about Team USA and their rotations. All right, welcome to What's in a Game. I'm Will Jones. I'm here as always with Grace Jean. How you doing, Grace?
I'm doing pretty good. I woke up kind of early this morning so that I could watch gymnastics as I do. Because gymnastics is usually, I don't know, I guess some of the events were early in the morning and some of them were like noonish. But yeah, that's my, I guess, second favorite Olympic sport now. It's interesting because when it comes to the Summer Olympics in particular, before I really got into basketball, gymnastics was the only event that I ever really paid attention to. Of course, I'd known about, the Michael Phelpses of the world, the Usain Bolts of the world, etc. But I didn't really follow those other sports. But this year, watching basketball, watching gymnastics, and just trying to keep track of, which channels everything is on, I've been browsing, let's say, a lot more than I had in the past. Obviously still watching gymnastics primarily. But besides that, I've really enjoyed watching volleyball, both indoor and beach volleyball. I don't know if you ever watched that before, either like professionally or at the college level?
I watched some Nebraska volleyball because Voya, who was on our show recently, he's in Lincoln, Nebraska. He's going to school there, I believe, for some kind of PhD. Anyway, he lives in Lincoln, and the girls' Nebraska volleyball team is like massive, and they did this really cool. They like filled the football stadium for a volleyball game.
Oh, I
Eh,
remember that.
Yeah, and
That was that was just this past year, right? And it was like a record
yeah,
attendance for a sporting event. Is that right?
I don't know about that, but it was
Okay.
some kind of record or something, and it was just like exciting to see the atmosphere of the Nebraska volleyball team. They're really good. So I watched that, and I've watched the Olympics. I always liked beach volleyball, though. There's just something about the 2-on-2 out on the beach,
Mm,
and I don't know if it's because
yeah, the
Chris
indoor
Marlowe's
volleyball,
doing it that I
it
like.
gets a bit crowded. That's right. Chris Marlowe was doing the call for the beach volleyball for sure. Have any of the teams like stood out to you? I'm actually really impressed with, is it Nuss and Cloth are one of the teams for Team USA in beach volleyball. I really like watching them play. They're like a really cool, I think, offensive team because they have so many. It feels like they have a lot of different like shots in their arsenal. Like I didn't even know that there were like different kinds of shots in volleyball because all I knew about it was spiking the ball. I was very bad at, well, really all sports in high school, but especially when we played volleyball in gym class, I couldn't even serve the ball over the net in like however many tries that they gave us. That was fun. I actually just looked it up, and that Nebraska volleyball game, it was a record attendance for a women's sporting event with over
Women's sporting,
92,000 fans. Yeah,
right?
which is
Yeah, that was
impressive.
really
I
cool.
mean, yeah, that makes sense that it didn't beat like a Super Bowl, for
Right,
example.
right.
No, but like the reason I bring up volleyball, and I've also been watching a little bit of like tennis, is that you have these sports that have like these long rallies, right? Sometimes where the ball's just kind of going back and forth and like the tension just continues to build and build. And I think it was Betsy Cash Money that was making this point online about like these kinds of sports that uh having more continuous flow in the play of like any sport uh actually builds audience engagement, and it's one of the things that I do definitely appreciate about both volleyball and tennis, which I haven't really watched since I was like a very young child, but I watched a bit of it in these Olympics. So, yeah, that's basically what I've been enjoying when basketball isn't on. Of course, like in gymnastics, like the U.S. women have just been absolutely crushing it. Simone Biles just winning everything. Suni Lee coming back with her stuff, everything that went on with her like kidney disorder that she had to take some time off of the sport and then, come back and didn't even know if she'd be able to compete, let alone compete at this level, and already has several, I think 3 medals because they won the team event. And then today she just took bronze in the uneven bars final, and she was incredible. This was the best that I've seen her perform that routine in a couple of months now. So very
Whoa.
excited about the Olympic sports. What
Yeah.
about you?
I always loved swimming. Swimming, like just growing up watching the
Mm,
Michael Phelps saga was amazing. And the USA is not as dominant this year in swimming, but Katie
mm.
Ledecky still got a medal, which was great. I'm glad she at least, or like she got a gold medal, so I was excited about that. Yeah, we've been watching basketball. This is honestly the most Olympic basketball I've ever watched. Usually
Mm.
I'm just like, I don't really watch that much because I always just assume the USA is going to win. The other one that I really care about, at least recently, because it's a new sport, is street skateboarding. I always watch the skateboarding. Nigel Houston got bronze in that, which was kind of disappointing because he's never won a gold. He's won like everything else you could possibly win in competitive skateboarding except getting a gold at the Olympics. And it was Yuto Horigome who won gold in that, who he won last Olympics too, and he's from Japan. So he
Mm.
just couldn't get it done, but at least he medaled. And then the guy who got silver in that event was an American too, who's Jagger Eaton, who
I think I saw that. They would think they had the replays of that on yesterday.
oh, cool. Yeah, it's a fun one. Like you do a little routine in the whole skate park and then you do a best trick and then your whole like total aggregate score across those two
Mm.
events determines your final position. So it was cool. 2 Americans in the top 3. But yeah, it was a fun event. I watched Djokovic win the gold this morning. So he got his first Olympic medal. It happened to be gold. That's going to Serbia.
No, but I actually caught Djokovic's match this morning as well, and it was incredibly tense. It was incredibly close, and anyone that follows me on Twitter knows that I actually watched challengers this weekend, so I get really nervous when I watch tennis now because I don't want somebody to get injured while I'm watching.
Yeah,
I hate that.
I need to watch that
Um,
movie.
but like I thought he was incredible, and it was crazy to me because I felt like as good as Novak was, a lot of his points, it felt like came from Carlos's errors. And I'm not
Hmm.
like a tennis person, so
Hmm.
I know you watch the sport, but how do you feel about like that statement?
I think it's typical for Djokovic. Like Djokovic is kind
Okay.
of like the metaphor I'd give for him. He's kind of like this brick wall where he's the best serve returner in the world, and that he's been like
Mm,
that for his whole career basically. So he's
yeah,
just like he may not be hitting the most amount of winners. He's not as like risky. So he'll just like play consistently and kind of wait for the opponent to make the mistake. Like
to
that's
make
like
the
kind of
mistake.
his game a
Mm.
lot of the time. He will just outlast you with his consistency, which I think is why he's able to like still compete at age 37.
That's a really interesting point. Because I was actually talking to Voya on Twitter. He's also obviously a huge fan of Novak and rooting for Serbia in all of these events for sure. But the fact that he's able to compete at such a high level in this sport, trying to find like marginal advantages that
Hmm.
don't rely on your athleticism by just kind of being solid and consistent, like you say. No, that's an interesting perspective to have on how to sort of manufacture longevity or even like what types of like styles of play just happen to last longer.
It's just so weird because I liked Djokovic from a young age, where Nadal and Federer were the most popular players, and I was just not really into them. And then when Djokovic came on the scene and he was like somebody new at the time, I was like, "Ooh, I'm gonna root for this guy." And he would do funny impressions of all the players, like even women players. And so I thought he was just like a funny, like new
I'm
guy
sure
on the
that went
scene.
over well.
Yeah, I think in retrospect, people kind of got pissed about it, but at the time, I thought it was funny. But and then we got Jokic on the Nuggets, and so this Serbia connection I never thought I'd have in my life, but it's been amazing. So I
Mm.
was really
I was actually
proud.
wondering about that. So you were actually a fan of Novak first,
Yeah, I
and you
was.
happened to
Yeah,
watch tennis, and
I've been
then
a fan
Jokic
of
came
him
to your
for
team, and
yeah. The two sports I played in my life was tennis and basketball, so it's kind of cool that like these are my two kind of favorite sports in a way.
Will's trying to become an honorary Serbian, you guys. So
Yes,
let
I'm
us know if
trying.
he's done enough in the comments.
I'm rooting for Serbia in the Olympics, who they just had their last group stage game, and then we had the draw after that. It was basically to determine what teams were going to be on what side of the bracket with USA and or Germany, and Serbia ended up on the USA side. So we were all kind of sad about that because Serbia is going to have to play the US in the semifinals at the earliest now instead of the final. And on our predictions episode, we all had, I think, Serbia and USA in the final. Maybe one of us should have been different and picked them in the semifinal, but
Yeah, but I don't think any of us wanted them to have to play each other earlier.
yeah,
There was a
exactly.
little bit of wish casting in all of our brackets, not
That's
just
true.
mine.
Yeah.
So the brackets are out, but let's start with our Nuggets. Canada played Spain in their final game of the group stage, and they won that game. They went 3-0. They were already guaranteed a spot in the quarterfinals, but this allowed them to be the top seed in their group. Canada, I think, has had stretches where they look really good defensively. But honestly, for the most part, I have yet to see a game, whether it was in exhibition play or in the tournament, where they looked truly impressive, if that makes sense. And, I think some people have already clocked some of the issues that Canada was going to have in the tournament just because of their personnel. Right now, their big rotation is primarily Dwight Powell and Kelly Olynyk, and Trey Lyles is playing some kind of 4 and 5 in there as well. They're really having issues rebounding, and that was a huge problem against Spain, which Spain isn't even that big of a team, and they don't have any like dominant interior force that you would think would particularly pick on that issue. But it was really, it felt like a concerted group effort on the part of Spain to acquire 17 offensive rebounds in recall that in FIBA the games are only 40 minutes. 17 offensive rebounds would be absurd, unacceptable. Like the coach would be yelling at everybody in the locker room in an NBA game, a 48-minute game with many more possessions than they have in FIBA. In a 40-minute game, it's just almost inexplicable. I wasn't sure, maybe Canada wasn't trying as hard in this game, especially at the beginning. I felt like they didn't have quite the level of, defensive focus that I personally feel like they're going to need in the knockout rounds, because I, again, have yet to be impressed with their offense. But defensively, they were kind of like mid, kind of at best. They were getting cooked by this Spanish guard, Brizuela, who, I mean, he was doing everything on the ball, off the ball. Rudy Fernandez was being a menace, uh, as he is sometimes in international play. And yeah, I wasn't impressed with the overall game plan, but they were able to eke it out because they have SGA, they have all of this talent.
Mhm.
Andrew Nembhard had a good game, 18 points, right? Yeah, well, what did you think of Canada's performance in this game? And maybe you could talk a little bit about how Jamal Murray in particular looked, coming off the bench here.
Yeah, I think in the friendly games, I was pretty low on Canada, and I even said I didn't think they would make it to the semifinal, which we're about to make predictions in a bit here, and I'll probably pick them to actually make the semifinals, even though I'm not super impressed with them either. Like you said, I think you're right about that. I don't know. Sometimes when I just looked at their roster and it's Kelly Olynyk and Powell, and I look at, some of the other guys on the team, I was like a little underwhelmed with the roster. But, the more that I've watched these games, the more that I see that, the more, just talent or versatility and depth you have overall, you can outlast teams like Spain, like we just
Hmm.
saw.
You've
You
talked
know,
a little bit about Canada applying ball pressure as a way to kind of augment that advantage, right?
yeah, against
You know.
Australia, I saw that that was what they were trying to do for sure. Did you see any of that, like against Spain in particular? Anything that they
Yeah,
were
I mean,
trying?
I just kind of agree with you. I think
Yeah.
that at all times they can have at least one of Lou Dort, Dylan Brooks, Nikhil Alexander Walker, Andrew Nembhard on the floor. All those guys are good, at least at the guard position, and even some bigger wings in the case of Dort and Dylan Brooks. They're great point of attack defenders. And, those guys applying ball pressure, it does wear teams down, especially. And when you think about in FIBA, the importance of guard play to the other team's offense, if you can disrupt that in any way, you can be cool. In this particular game, I thought they were very inconsistent with not the ball pressure itself, but everything that has to happen on the backside to, make that viable. We've also talked on the podcast before about some of the pitfalls of overuse of ball pressure as your kind of main defensive tool, right? Because
Hmm.
teams can take advantage of that, whether it's, you know, setting higher screens, forcing cross matches, etc. I don't think the ball pressure itself was really like the problem in this game with Canada's defense. I thought it was just inconsistency in everything else, and in particular that defensive
The
rebounding.
rebounding. Yeah, I mean, Spain was playing for their lives in this game. If they needed to win it to stay in it. And
That's right.
so, as much as Canada seemed to lack some execution, it's not like Spain was slacking. So,
Right. No,
and this was
that's
just kind
right.
of a down year for Spain, maybe you could say, because they've done better in past tournaments and in FIBA.
Right. I
They're
think
getting
they're a
older.
good team, but yeah, they are getting older for sure. I think it was the beginning of this game. I talked about them not having a dominant interior force, but Juancho Hernan Gomez was trying to do everything he could to punish Canada on the glass whenever they weren't boxing out or were, late to or not contesting rebounds as vigorously maybe as they would have if this was more of a must-win type game like it was for Team Spain. But yeah, I did want to just talk a little bit about Jamal's
Yeah,
performance in
let's
this
get into
game.
that.
I did think that he didn't look quite as good against Spain as he did versus Australia. And,
Hmm.
versus Australia was already like, all right, there's some good, there's some bad. It's not great. I think at the beginning of the game in particular, his first stint, he was kind of forcing things on offense. And defensively, you saw the limitations that Jamal just has, even when he's, at 100%. He's not like a great screen navigator. For example, gave up a couple of wide open threes when he went under, in times when he doesn't necessarily need to. Sometimes um, this wasn't just a Jamal issue, but it also happened to him where he's kind of uh, pushing maybe a little too hard to fight over a screen and then fouls a 3-point shooter, just like that kind of stuff. But I thought starting from his second stint on, he was doing a better job of setting guys up on the bench. He had 6 assists in this game, did have 3 turnovers. One of them in particular, I thought was one of those times where I wanted him to try to score, but instead he tried to force a pass through traffic. So it resulted in a turnover. I don't actually remember any other like egregious turnovers or anything like that, but he was being a good setup man, stopped forcing things. He was playing with good pace in particular, like he has really the whole tournament, despite the other um, struggles he may be having. He's not like walking the ball up the floor. He's definitely passing it up, getting the team into their half court offense, and like kind of semi transition offense a lot quicker than even I expected. So, that was good. Jamal's a very polarizing player
Yeah.
for Nuggets fans. And everyone wants to see him look amazing, but I just don't think, like you said in our last episode, it's probably not going to be his role on this team. But Andrew Nembhard
Oh,
has managed to carve out that niche for himself here.
yeah.
But if you wanted to say something about
Yeah.
Jamal,
I just want to wrap up some Jamal stuff. We went kind of extensively a little more about Jamal and how to set expectations for him because he's coming off an injury. Apparently, we don't know where he is along the lines with recovering with that injury. We don't know what his
he is still
mindset
on minutes
is.
restriction, right? It
Oh,
seems because
yes.
he's only played. I think the most he played was like 18 minutes in any of these games, and he played
Yeah.
only 17.
17. Yes, and he ended up with 4 points. He was a -4. He didn't make a three. He shot two, and it was 2 of 5 overall. Had six
Yeah, that
assists.
3-point shot.
Yeah, so he had 6 assists and 3 turnovers. The game against Australia, 5 assists, no turnovers. So I think it's a lot of the times I do want to see his passing because that's more of the role that he's playing for Team Canada. I think it's fair to like judge how he's doing in terms of facilitating, and I think he's creating more like eye-popping moments with some of his assists. So I'm happy about that. And I kind of was saying last episode and just on Twitter, because it's been, he is polarizing and Nuggets fans are all debating Jamal right now. He's probably the most like hot topic to be discussing if you're a Nuggets fan. I think like there was kind of a backlash against the criticism. A lot of people were coming out in like support of him and saying, I think Jamal's a good player. And I kind of was getting to a point where I was just going to write off this whole Olympics almost, whether that's unfair or not, to just say, I don't even care how he looks in this Olympics. I'm just going to wait till the season starts before I'm like judging him. But the one thing that I kind of can't let go is the 3-point shot, because it's just like, what is going on with that? Like, you should still be able to take some, because, man, you'd think,
so you want the volume to go up.
I guess if the volume went up, his percent, he'd make more, right? But he's like, what, shooting 10% from three
Ideally, but he's
It's
shooting
so
like
bad.
10% from three right now.
So I don't even know about that. It's like he had that step back three against Australia, and I was like, oh, that looks like a Jamal three. That's great.
But then you had the step back three versus Spain, and it was like, yikes.
Not good. Yeah, so it's like, how much do you need to see glimpses of to make you feel comfortable? And how often do you need to see those glimpses? And I guess you can fall on either side of that. You'd have to be pretty optimistic and like relaxed to be like, I only need to see one awesome step back three from Jamal to feel good. Like, because that's basically all we have right now. So I'm kind of wondering about that. I guess the calf, if he's still struggling with that, would explain it. But we also did see Kevin Durant play this Olympics, like you said on last episode. So it's also funny because I've been hearing people talk about Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and LeBron and AD, kind of these players who we know they're good, but in the regular season maybe get criticized more for not playing up to the standards we're traditionally used to with them. They're having amazing.
I feel like Booker is generally regarded as a very good regular season player.
Yeah, I think Booker is the like exception, but because he'd been in some MVP like discussions within the past few years. All these players are playing really well for the USA, and I think a lot of the debate around that is pointing to just the overall talent of Team USA and the roles that the players are playing and how well they kind of fit them. But Kevin Durant can kind of transcend role, because if he's just like on with his shot and he's just pulling up from anywhere, whether it's ISO or like catch and
whatever
shoot, whatever
he needs to do,
then he can just succeed with that. With Jamal, I go back and forth then, because I think, well, Canada has NBA players. The Olympics, there's players from all over the world, but if you're in the NBA, you are truly elite to play in that league. Like, that is the best league in the world. It's like, could the talent on Canada still somehow open up some opportunities for Jamal the way it's kind of done for other star players on Team USA? But it seems like it's just agreed upon with him and the coaching staff and the players that he's kind of in this backseat role, which is why I am less concerned about him. So it's hard to like know what's real and what's not with Jamal right now.
Right. Oh, a real or fake. That's interesting. Maybe we could do something like that at the end of the Olympics and talk about, whether these Olympic performances
who was real and who was fake.
Real or fake. Yeah, no, I'll just reiterate what I said before about Jamal. I never really cared about the stats. And I think the criticism for the lack of production, particularly regular season in the NBA, is just kind of whatever. It is what it is at this point. As long as he stays efficient like he normally is in the regular season, I don't really care. And obviously in the playoffs, the efficiency like tanked, right? Probably in large part due to the injury. I do think that the efficiency is more of a cause for concern in the Olympics, but not so much because his volume is so low that like the difference between going 1 of 3 and going 2 of 3, like one more shot makes all that. And so that's just too small a sample size for me to care. I don't really care as much about the 3-point shooting, especially because it doesn't seem like that's like the directive in this Canada offense. Like they just don't. I will say, like, I still want him to look more comfortable when he gets those catch and shoot looks, because he's still trying to do that pump fake and drive or whatever, and he's clearly not comfortable taking those shots. And then the pull-up threes, they're hit or miss and they are low volume. I'm more concerned with how Jamal is moving. And I I'm not concerned with it, but it's not great. I tweeted this or reposted someone did a compilation of his highlights from the 2023 Western Conference Finals, and I was like, "Holy crap! Like this is like a different player, even than we saw in like the regular season from Jamal, which it should be. Like that was literally an all-time playoff peak that he achieved in 2023. It was like what there were three players that had ever averaged over 30 points in conference finals and 50 40 90 splits, and Jamal's one of them. Like that was crazy, but he was just like versatile shot creation. He was getting wherever he wanted on the floor, no hesitation on his shots. Like that's what I want to see, even if it is in small doses. Right now we're getting it in excruciatingly small doses, and then we're getting larger sample sizes of him being more hesitant, less comfortable getting to his spots, in large part because of his movement looking not limited, but certainly not. I wouldn't say that I'm looking for him to be explosive, but I'm just looking for him to like look fluid, look shifty, like all of the things that make his game what it is when he is at his best. The numbers themselves are whatever to me. It's more I'm literally just watching how he's operating on the floor. And right now it's like meh. I'm not satisfied with it, but I'm not uber concerned at the same time. I will say that some have pointed out the fact that the Olympics are going to last another week, and then there are, I think, less than 8 weeks between then and the Nuggets training camp, because the Nuggets and the Boston Celtics are playing a preseason game in Abu Dhabi earlier than everyone else starts their preseason, which means they're going to open their training camp early as well. Both Jokic and Jamal are probably going to have even more condensed off seasons than we anticipated because of the Olympics, because of this early start to their preseason. So that's going to be another layer of like maybe concern if you think that more rest is what they need. But yeah, I mean, he's this ongoing question. We always end up talking about him for longer than anticipated.
It's just so much speculation, but I think the way you laid it out is really fair, that it's not just about the stats, it's about what you're actually seeing on the court and just how he's moving, and like his role can explain the stats, but it can't necessarily explain how he physically looks. So that is a very fair point, and I think that's just really all that it comes down to. And the internet is a hostile environment often, and one thing I do know for sure is that Jamal is listening to it, because I saw that he actually liked some tweets the other day about this. So I'm just hoping it motivates him. Online. Just hoping it motivates him at this point. That's all I can really ask. Let's move to Jokic.
All right, let's talk about our other nugget here. So Serbia played their last group play game against South Sudan. This one was for all the marbles, kind of. So Serbia needed to win this game, in my opinion, because otherwise they would have been locked in to playing Germany in the quarterfinals. And South Sudan would have gone through as Serbia would have been the wild card in that case, and South Sudan would have gone through to the quarterfinals. But Serbia won. I will say they struggled in this game in some of the ways that I thought would be the case if this was a close game, which it kind of was until the fourth quarter. Serbia, we saw when they played Team USA, struggles with having really an athleticism disadvantage in basically every matchup with another team that I would say would be like a medal contender. That includes Team USA, obviously. Team Canada, they're at an athleticism disadvantage, although they have size, and I think that's maybe an aspect of athleticism if you want to consider that. Obviously, Team Germany has both size and athleticism as well. Serbia has a lot of skilled players, but South Sudan has a lot of great athletes, and they have a lot of length and a lot of shooting. And everyone has a green light, it seems like, in this game. So I think the reason that it was close is, one, that Serbia wasn't trying quite as hard because they didn't need the win. They needed to just not get completely blown out to make it to the quarterfinal. They were kind of, especially in the first half, I don't think Jokic or Milutov were doing a great job clearing the defensive glass. South Sudan was just getting putback after putback after putback. And I was like, man, how many misses have they forced? And then South Sudan just gets a dunk out of it, just, on that offensive rebound putback. So that was a big thing in this game. Also, a lot of turnovers for Serbia, and part of that is because they did get more of like a ball popping kind of style going in this game with their offense. It hasn't been a totally consistent theme throughout the tournament. So, with assists come turnovers. That's,
Hmm.
part of
And
how
they
that
had a
works.
lot of assists in that
They
game.
sure did. What was it, like 30
30
assists to
something.
31 made baskets or
I think it was
something?
like 31 assists, 32 made baskets or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
crazy.
And Jokic was able to completely dominate South Sudan. Like, what was his efficiency? He had like 77% true shooting in that game, but part of it was
Yeah.
because they kept just fouling him. At one
Hmm.
point, South Sudan just decided we're going to front the post and like rotate the backside help over immediately, and that's where a lot of the turnovers for Serbia came from, was forcing those post entry passes when there wasn't something there, and either the guy that was fronting Jokic or the guy that was rotating backside help was able to deflect the ball, and South Sudan was getting all these runouts, right? Did anything stand out to you about that, and how, like in particular, how Serbia was opting to respond to um the fronting of the post for Jokic?
I was just more thinking like I was watching early on in the game and Jokic rolling to the rim was opening up more passes to him, easier passes, despite the
Yep,
fact that they had length. It was just
yep,
open more often. And when you're
yes.
doing the post entry pass and they're just fronting it, it just makes it harder already. Like it's stagnant. You're passing over long arms. It's receiving into long arms as tall as Jokic is. Whereas I just didn't think Sudan had the personnel to even like contain any ball handler on the pick and roll, let alone recover back to Jokic. Like
Yeah, that's a good point. Their point of attack wasn't
yeah,
really great.
anytime they were recovering back to Jokic, he's just way too big for anyone on that team. I was like even thinking they should just stick to him on the roll rather than like kind of like the Wolves were doing, but they don't have
I agree. I agree with that.
and just like let the ball handlers on Serbia try and like do something and dare them because they were like struggling. Micic like did okay with some assists and some shots here and there.
Yeah, dude, Micic actually. Look, I have my issues with Micic as a player, particularly in an NBA context, but something that impressed me about him in this tournament, and I was digging into the NBA numbers as well, is his finishing at the rim is actually quite nice. He doesn't have like high frequency there, but he's able to maintain a really strong core even through contact and finish
Hmm.
strong on not just layups, but kind of short like push shots and things like that. And part of that's because he is like a bigger guard, like he's like a legitimately like, you know, 6'4.5", 6'5" kind of guard. So that's just interesting because his game is more about like quickness and shiftiness. But when he does kind of bully guys a little bit and get in there, and he's able to finish strong, and that was evident in this game where you saw South Sudan try a little bit of what you're talking about, but not really in high volume of like trying to make the guards make a play.
I was thinking, man, is this going to be like a feed Jokic kind of game? Because everyone else kind of struggling scoring, and like he could just dominate that team if he needed to. But like you said, they didn't need to win this game necessarily. Is it strategic maybe to save Jokic and not run him too hard into the ground in the group stage? It's not the Serbian way to just feed one guy over and over. They're a ball movement philosophy team. But so I was wondering about that. But then, of course, Bogey got really hot, even with like little separation, making some threes, whereas he was not hitting open shots in some games and not looking super comfortable. This was a huge response from him. And I think Jokic just didn't need to take over in the post as much because Bogey had some offense going from the perimeter, which was really nice. I thought it was funny that someone joked on Twitter that like South Sudan is going to be the basketball team that everyone's going to be trying to create in the future, like these tall, lengthy, athletic kind of ball handling players who can shoot from anywhere and like five out. And Jokic had to
So
play at the
like everyone's gonna try to create basketball teams that have tall guys that can help on defense by virtue of their length and can also do things on offense.
yeah,
That is
just
a
yeah.
hot take, let me tell you.
But
But
yeah,
that
everyone
and that's
wants
kind
that.
of what is the deal with this team. Like you talk
Yeah.
about, especially the shooting. I really didn't expect South Sudan to be um like they're like they've been a really like high volume 3-point shooting team, especially like
Yeah.
everyone has a green light. I think there was only maybe one player that would sometimes like hesitate and try to just run a DHO whenever he got the ball, but everyone else basically had the green light to shoot if they've got that open shot. And that was something that was kind of plaguing Serbia in this game because their offense, I thought, looked pretty good for the most part in this game, even with Jokic off the floor. And I'll talk a little bit about why, because it was not because their half-court offense was good. It was not.
Yeah.
But whenever they did have a bad offensive possession, like South Sudan was pushing that ball up the floor, creating a numbers advantage and generating open three. And I swear every single time they did, that three was cashed. I'm looking at the percentages from that game. South Sudan shot 41% from three on 34 attempts, which is a good number. That's something that we've seen, not just in the Olympics, but also in some of the exhibition games and the qualifying tournaments where you have a team that's like, okay, we're at a little bit of a talent disadvantage. What are the other ways that we can try to bump the numbers game, in our favor? This is a way that most teams that are not named Serbia are trying to create some kind of, March Madness style upset against Team USA is by trying to take more threes than they do. And when you're playing a team like Team USA, even Team Canada, pretty low volume 3-point shooting team, and Team Serbia, you can have at least that advantage on them and at least give yourself a chance. And they pretty much were until the fourth quarter, just kind of staying in this game / like keeping it close, trying to take advantage of every mistake that Serbia made. But I don't think that their execution was like crisp enough to keep it up down the stretch. They are a team that sort of reminds me of, like you said, these tall, like lanky defenders. They're forcing a lot of turnovers and trying to push pace. They remind me of the New Orleans Pelicans, especially in that they lack a bunch of self-creation outside of Carlik Jones, who was again cooking in this game. He was cooking, Team USA in that exhibition game that South Sudan almost won, and also just has been really good for South Sudan as their primary initiator, ball handler, and all of that. But outside of him, there's not a lot of great self-creation or playmaking. So you end up with a pretty rough turnover picture. South Sudan ended up with, Serbia had 17. Actually, South Sudan won the turnover game because Serbia had 17 turnovers. South Sudan only had 11, which is actually pretty good, but only 20 assists, which was rough. Some of that's just missed shots, but I think a lot of it is like not knowing exactly when to pass the ball either. Like I said, I think they need more playmaking. But again, like that reminds me of the sort of New Orleans Pelicans formula, like you say, other teams that are trying to create this like, team all tall boys, similar to what OKC is doing too, except they have they just keep drafting these all NBA caliber players.
Yeah.
So they've, had a little bit more success in that particular regard.
I mean, it reminds me of our last episode talking about Kevin Durant and random basketball versus set plays, especially like how you asked about teams that may be less talented and how they approach that. And I think it's kind of cool because South Sudan kind of demonstrates how you can be random at times when you're doing something that you are really good at and it's like your identity. So the Nuggets might be really more random with their pick and roll. South Sudan's kind of more random in the way that they were hunting for threes. There are times where you can be organized and set up plays that's more organized to like maximize that because you're already good at it. But I felt like it was a clear difference from how they hunted the three, which maybe seemed more random. Maybe that's why they had some less turnovers. Why they sometimes had less assists and like didn't know when to pass. But there were times where like they had really creative out of bounds plays, like baseline out of bounds plays with some like confusing screens that even Jokic like kind of missed, and then it was like a wide open dunk. Or they even had
I remember that. I was so upset. I was like, man, how'd you miss that layup? I have to go back and check out that play because maybe South Sudan actually did something smart. Sometimes it's not the defense's fault. Sometimes the offense just outsmarted you.
Yeah, I think they just weren't expecting it. Like it was almost like I think Jokic was expecting this dude to kind of set like this flare rip screen kind of thing to go around to hit a three, and then he just kind of slipped and just got wide open in the paint, and like they just weren't ready for it. Or even just Jokic is at the level which requires low man, really it's just same as the Nuggets, really skilled low man defenders, and sometimes they punish that with getting some lobs and like some little dunker spot lobs. It wasn't happening a lot, but when they were organized in those ways, they were generating more easy points. And yeah, it was just hard to,
Right. It makes you wonder, like, maybe if you did this a little bit more frequently, you would have
yeah.
a little bit more efficient of an offense. But you also understand why, especially in those, there were some like great defensive, like half court defensive possessions by Serbia. You can understand why South Sudan is putting a lot more emphasis on like pushing pace and trying to be a little bit more, like random, like you say, both in transition and semi transition to try to create an advantage that won't allow, a good and Serbia is a good defense to get set. Yeah, actually that was a really interesting point about the organized versus random basketball. So one of the things that I really appreciated about Serbia's bench in this game, and it's not just the non-Jokic minutes, it's really like I need to double check, but I believe there were running lineups of kind of all bench guys, with Milutinov kind of at the helm, kind of
Hmm.
anchoring that front court there. Those minutes had been very, let's say, hit or miss in past games. It's definitely a miss when you're playing, all the Hall of Famers on Team USA, but then they looked pretty good versus Puerto Rico. I thought they played them maybe a little bit better than a draw versus South Sudan's bench. And South Sudan actually had a lot of players that basically didn't sit in this game, but of course they did have some substitutions in as well. But Team Serbia was playing with a lot of pace in those bench minutes, and especially when they could get set in the half court, they were able to have a good defense. Get out and run, and Serbia can be a really, really good transition offense, with or without Jokic on the floor, and that's what you really got to see. I think more so um, than the other games in pool play in this game because in particular I thought like you mentioned Micic, who did I think start in the second half, but for the most part he played a lot of his minutes with the bench. You had Jovic coming off the bench. Bogey played some minutes with them as well, and it always helps when he's hitting those shots because they made a lot of threes in those minutes when Jokic was sitting that just kind of helped to create and maintain a buffer, while he was sitting. It also helped, I think, that South Sudan's defensive directive was clearly to front the post on Jokic, just try to make the entry pass as difficult as possible, make sure he doesn't get the ball if you can. But whenever Milutinov was in, they weren't necessarily doing that. And Milutinov isn't some like beast in the post or anything, but he's pretty big. And South Sudan was forced to help whenever he did get the ball. And so they weren't like forcing turnovers as much because they weren't being as aggressive guarding him. And he was able to make the simple passes out, those kick out passes, and guys were knocking down shots. So I thought it was like a little bit easier actually. And maybe South Sudan should have been as aggressive defensively on Milutinov in those bench minutes because I don't know that that unit would have necessarily been able to make the right passes, or like you say, they were often countering with like, okay, we're just going to run pick and roll instead of operating through Jokic in the post in order to counter the way that they were guarding Jokic in the post, or in this case Milutinov in the post. But they didn't do that, and so Serbia was able to take advantage and win that game.
And with that win, they advanced to the knockout round where they got selected to be on the side of the bracket as USA, where they will be playing Australia. So we can look at that
Yeah, let's do it.
bracket. It turns out that Greece and Canada and Australia all got out of Group A, and Spain was the one
That's
that was
right, because
left out.
Greece is the wild card.
Yes.
That's right. Spain needed to win that game. It's an interesting tiebreaker scenario for Group A because Canada went 3-0, but then you had three teams that won one game each in Australia, Greece, and Spain. So even though the way that the tiebreaker worked is that it was based on the point differential only between those teams in the games that they played each other. So what you did against Team Canada didn't matter at all because they weren't part of the tiebreaker. And so that was actually the way that Spain was really hurt because they had a particularly bad game against Australia. So even though they had beaten Greece and they had played Canada pretty close, that fact of that bad game versus Australia hurt their tiebreaker point differential. which was really, I think, rough and maybe is something that they might look at when it comes to the tiebreaker rules for next year. Not that there's a huge gap in like the quality of Team Spain versus Team Greece, but I think the Team Spain is just always a tough out, and they would have been, just as worthy of a quarterfinals team as Greece. But that's also what made that game with Team Canada so competitive, is that actually if Spain had won that game, they would have just won the group outright
Yeah.
and been in the quarterfinal. But because they lost it, no margin between Spain and Canada in that game would have helped them,
Yeah.
in advancing. So that was really tough for them. But Greece is happy because the fact that Serbia beat South Sudan meant that South Sudan was not a wild card, because they would have, I think, if South Sudan had won that game versus Serbia, they would have had the tiebreaker with Greece to move on to the quarterfinals as the wild card as well. A lot of like interesting little like gamification rules in this case. So it was interesting just kind of watching Team Serbia that afternoon and thinking like Giannis is cheering Jokic on real hard right now, because he's like, buddy, I need you to come through for me.
Yeah, I hope
I wonder if
Giannis.
any of them were in the arena.
Hell yeah, that'd be funny.
Anyway, let's talk about the bracket, because like you said, Team Serbia is on the same side of the bracket as Team USA. They can't play each other in the quarterfinals because they were in the same group. But Team USA also, like, they are a super high seed. So the top seeds in the tournament are USA and Germany. So they get to play the two wildcard teams, which in this case were Greece and Brazil. I will say that the quarterfinals still have some upset potential, but there is a clear favorite in every single one of these games, right? USA obviously going to be the favorite over Team Brazil, Canada over Team France, and Germany over Greece. I do think that Serbia is a favorite over Australia. However, there are certain aspects of this matchup that, leave me thinking like this is not a code red, but like has upset potential. Australia's offense is really good. They play fast. They spread you out. They like to shoot a lot. They have Patty Mills. I was not impressed with the way that Team Serbia was guarding Australia for the most part when they played each other in exhibition play before the Olympics started. But and Serbia lost that game. It was close, though. Serbia lost that game, and they were missing a lot of players. So Jokic played, but I believe Bogi was out. I believe Marinkovic was out. I'm not sure if Dobric played. Dobric is, I believe, starting for Serbia right now. So, you had Guduric, who I think, did fine in that role. But it also meant that everybody on the bench also had to move up a spot in the rotation, right? So that's just something to keep in mind for that matchup. And again, I wasn't impressed with the defense, particularly in transition. I thought like, okay, like Serbia needs, like, these guys need to get back. They need to get in formation because Australia loves to play fast. We've talked about this in our Olympic preview, how Josh Giddey, but not just Josh Giddey, puts a big emphasis on getting the ball up the floor as quickly as possible in every possession. And it's just how Australia plays, and it's a difficult style to guard, right? It's the same reason that like Serbia is a really good team when they do decide to play in transition, which they don't do with high frequency like Australia does. But that's just something I would be wary of. Although Serbia will have like the size advantage, I think they'll have an overall talent advantage, not just because of Jokic, but because of all of the players that are very skilled on that team. But Australia's got some athletes, and yeah, I think if Serbia can strangle pace, they should be fine in that game. But if they can't, it's going to be a nail biter.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this is single game elimination. It's high stakes. Not to bring up the old game 2 of Nuggets versus the Wolves, but sometimes you can just melt down in a high stakes moment. So anything can happen. But like you said, there are favorites. I also am thinking about how many of these teams actually played each other in exhibition, and is it only Serbia and Greece? It's just interesting because we were talking about Serbia, South Sudan, and you can gain some things in hindsight of maybe we should have done this more, maybe we should have gone to this action more, or, called more plays to get more buckets in this scenario. I don't know how much can really be gleaned from this exhibition game where they were missing players, but at least it's something. You can learn something and just you're more familiar. So it's kind of interesting that they played an exhibition and they're both pretty good teams. It's not like Australia is horrible or anything and they're getting outclassed. I was wondering though if Canada and France was like maybe the closest
So here's
game.
my thing with the Canada France matchup. I think behind Serbia, Australia, maybe understandably because Canada and Serbia aren't the top seeds. I think that this game has upset potential. We talked about how Wemby is the reason that France is a country that or a team that you think could theoretically medal at this competition, like realistically, like you could see the path.
Yeah.
The reason I think Canada in particular is vulnerable to an upset here is that their offense just has no flow to it versus a team like France that they know it. They're heavily reliant on their defense because their offense also like sputters for long stretches in large part because they are more limited in their guard play than these other teams. But sometimes like they have guys who can create their own shot that can create some timely buckets for themselves and for others. They have Wemby, who is kind of a nightmare for a lot of different players to try to deal with. I do think that Canada has the wing depth potentially to at least mitigate Wemby's impact, but you never know how France is going to decide to actually use him. Canada's offense, hot mess. France's offense, also a hot mess. But France's defense, it's Rudy, it's Wemby, it's Bilal Koulibaly, it's Nicholas Batum. There's just a lot of length in the court. It makes like running a half court offense incredibly difficult. They're going to force a lot of turnovers. I think both teams are going to try to do basically the same things. The sort of difference between the two being that Canada's going to struggle to finish defensive possessions because they don't have the same size on the front line that France does in Rudy and Wemby. And, Wemby is the rebounder that he is, which is like kind of a question mark really at this point because we only saw him play at the 5 for like half a season. He's playing at the 5 for France for large stretches now. We even saw in the last group play game versus Germany that Ruby didn't start in the second half, so they were staggering him more. I don't know if that was to make Wemby's minutes more efficient or to make the bench minutes less, like non-Wemby minutes less atrocious. But that's just going to be something to watch is France going to struggle to rebound because Rudy is like their main guy, or is Canada going to struggle more because of, like they have their own size limitations and all of that. So that's going to be it's interesting that the both teams kind of have the same weaknesses, except you'd think that Canada would be able to muster up a little bit more consistent offense because they should have better guard play than France. And it's not just SGA, obviously. It's not even just Jamal. They also have Andrew Nembhard, who we shouted out already, that are able to create both their own shots, but also for others. So that's going to be what I'm watching in this game is like who makes the other team's offense look nastier. And that game has really
Right.
high potential to be just ugly.
Yeah, I feel like on like just I would assume France's defense would be able to impact what Canada is doing on offense more than the other way around, as you're saying.
Yeah.
So it is going to be really close. Feeling confident Serbia is going to win, but your points are making me realize it's maybe closer than I would have thought just initially. But Canada and France, I still am looking like I don't even know who I was going to pick initially. Nembhard though has been playing really well, and I'll just say it now before we don't have time to talk about it that his contract's looking better and better as this Olympics go on. And while I've said I'm not going to let this Olympics determine how I feel about Jamal, I am going to be maybe hypocritical and say I'm going to let it affect how I feel about Nembhard because he's looking awesome. And
Well,
yeah,
I think Nembhard's contract looked like a steal even before the Olympics because he
yeah,
looked great last regular season, particularly after I think it was after they traded Bruce that Nembhard starting in that shooting guard position, basically. Having that secondary ball handler next to Tyrese, and he can also, run certain units when Halliburton was out. Obviously, the Pacers have lots and lots of guards. Please give us one of them. Please let it be TJ McConnell. But yeah, that $18 million a year extension is just a huge steal. And I'm like, why aren't our players have, terrible agents like some of
Yeah.
these guys?
Yeah, losing
Um,
KCP for that amount of money, regardless of how good he is. But like to keep a role player like that, especially a guard and a guard who can score like Nembhard can for that amount of money
with
is
kind of
just
all-star potential, like he's in the Eastern Conference. I could see Nembhard making an
yeah, that's
all-star
true.
game, all-star team in the next few years for
Yeah,
sure. I mean,
depending on how the development goes. But I think regardless, like that number in a couple of years is gonna look like it's like this
oh,
is
an absolute
absurd,
steal.
like
Absolute
Derek
steal.
White level upsetting
Yeah.
contract.
Yeah. I mean, it is. Like, that's
Yeah,
what he's literally making Derek White money
money right
now
now.
before the salary cap jumps.
That's
Like,
true.
I think it's just like malpractice, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think some of these guys need to, just kind of shop around and try to make sure that their agents aren't,
Yeah,
um,
I
you
really
know,
want to go back and
terrible.
look at that draft with him because I think the Wolves could have drafted him.
Well,
And I was
everybody could have because he
he
went
was
31st, right?
oh okay yeah oh that was a mistake. I remember watching him on Gonzaga. When I was watching Strother on Gonzaga and Jalen Suggs and stuff, and I was like I liked Nembhard then too. So I've still been kind of following him even in the NBA. And his younger brother, is on Gonzaga right now. So I wonder if little Nembhard can be good someday. I don't think he doesn't look as good as Andrew Nembhard does back on Gonzaga at this point in college, but who knows? Interesting to watch him.
It just occurred to me that we have two Zags for Team Canada right now, and Nemhard and
Olynyk,
Kelly
yeah.
Olynyk, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Will, before we wrap this up, I just wanted to ask you about who do you think has the most to lose going into the knockout rounds?
Most to lose. Well, USA is such a heavy favorite that you would almost say them, but I kind of think they don't have that much to lose because they're just so stacked. If they
But I
lose,
mean, like,
if they lost, they have the most to lose because it's just like
it's got to be
absurd.
them, right? Like, it
Yeah.
has to be Team USA.
But I just think they aren't going to lose. I think it's like
Right.
certain that they're going to win. So I'm like, now my mind's going to like in this scenario, who
Mm.
really has the most to lose
Who
besides
realistically has the
them?
most to lose? Yeah.
Yeah. Germany is like the defending world champs,
I
but
think Germany has demonstrated pretty clearly that they're the second
they're
best
really
team
good.
in
Yeah.
this tournament.
So it's like if they kind of show a semblance of what we know they are, I think that's like a mission accomplished. I don't know. I just even if they don't make it to the final, I think they still look pretty good. And in a single game elimination where anything can happen, how much can your reputation be tarnished in a single game? Serbia has a lot of high hopes with Jokic. France is the home country. They have the phenom in Wemby, so
I don't think France is one of the countries that I expect to medal. I think they could,
mhm.
realistically, even. But I would kind of so if I had tiers here, I expect the USA to win gold. After that, there are two medals, right? Silver and bronze. And I expect those two medals to go to two of Germany, Serbia, Canada. But I could see France and like an outside chance, really for Australia. I think actually France has a better chance of medaling than Australia. I hope that doesn't come back to bite me. And then I don't see Greece or Brazil medaling at all.
No,
So those are
no.
like the three tiers.
It might be Serbia just because Jokic is like a once in a lifetime player who's going to be your best shot at medaling, who in the next 4 years is going to be 34,
Well,
like,
hopefully we have more players by then.
yeah,
Can I just say though that I think it helps that Serbia has a particular view of basketball and team basketball in that they wouldn't put it all on one player unless it was just like the worst game that he's ever had, basically, is what would have to happen for it to be put on one player. Like, I think it would be like it was on the team because it
yeah,
was like I think that the fact that he didn't play for the national team the last couple of or like it was last year and then like He played in Eurobasket the year before that, but then the summer before that, he didn't, and they were upset that he didn't even like join the team.
Yeah.
But I think it would be less about like blaming. Like, I mean, you even last summer, the guys that were on the national team, they got silver. Like, they didn't win gold in a tournament where Team USA was out, right? You'd think like, oh my gosh, like this is our chance to like win the gold. They lost to Germany in the gold medal game, but my understanding from just like perusing online is that they were still hailed as basically like heroes for like getting that far in the tournament, obviously qualifying them for the Olympics, getting the silver medal. Like it was good. That's why like Bogey is such like a hero there and all of that. And maybe all of that was just because Jokic didn't play and they were able to do it anyway. But I don't my impression isn't that it's on Jokic to deliver a gold medal. I think like is the perception there, and maybe there will be Serbians in the comments correcting me like, no, they have to win this year, or at least get silver, whatever it is. It's more like we wanted to play with the team and we want the team to play. And obviously, like they want the team to advance as far as possible and medal. But I don't think that if they don't, I don't know that it's going to be put on one player.
And I'm not even saying that they would put it on Jokic, and that is a good point. I think all Serbians are going to feel happy. I think they're putting their best foot forward.
Don't tell Serbians how they're going to feel.
I don't know how Serbians are going to feel, but I would argue that Serbians are Team Serbia is putting their best foot forward with what they have, with the coaching, with the players, with Jokic. You know, Team USA plays into this too. Like, what is the realistic expectation that you can upset them with this team? Does that then...
Yep.
For every country, you just say like, hey, what we're going to do, give it your best shot. And, you know, you don't have that much to lose just because the United States exists. I guess I was more hinting at the opportunity that Serbia has. This might be the best Serbian basketball player ever. And it's like, so just by that fact alone, having him on the national team, maybe it doesn't line up with the other talent. Like you had this transcendent player. The rest of the team's not like matching to go all the way and get the gold. So I could see like a future in where just the overall team is more talented just by like nature of growing the game and developing the game in Serbia and all that. So
you're just talking about taking advantage of Jokic's prime, effectively.
Yeah, exactly.
But like the same mindset like Nuggets fans have right now. That's what you're talking about.
In the next Olympics, he's going to be 34. I don't even know if he's going to be playing. I'm hoping he will be. I think he will be, but it's just, taking advantage of the opportunity of Jokic's prime. He's coming off one of the most memorable stretches in NBA history with this like 4 MVP caliber seasons in the championship. You got to do the best you can, which I think they're doing. So it's like you can't really ask for more.
I do think that they're doing that because even like versus South Sudan, I didn't see a single minute where it was a Jokic plus Milutinov lineup, which was very nice to see.
Yeah, can't do that. Yeah, I guess USA just has the most to lose. Let's just say that, and they're not going to. So let's do our predictions.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. All right. I'm going to pick Germany versus Greece, if you'd like. Okay. And then I'm going to pick Canada versus France.
Okay.
But this is, I think, the closest quarterfinal.
Yeah.
Team USA over Brazil, for sure.
Yep.
And then Serbia over Australia. I think they're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
For the final, it's probably going to be Team USA versus Germany because I just think Germany's going to figure it out versus Canada. Have a bit more versatility. And then...
Well, really quickly, what happened with... Because initially you had Serbia winning over USA when we did our predictions with Voya. And obviously
that was when it was the final. Actually, I had the USA getting upset earlier by France.
Oh, yeah, by France. Wow.
Hey, you talked about all this NBA caliber talent that France has.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, like we hadn't really seen, all we had seen was a couple exhibition games.
I mean, yeah, like this is my like real prediction bracket instead of my wish casting one that doesn't even know who makes the quarterfinal.
It's just a different mindset and approach with these.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And then in the bronze medal game, we're going to have Canada versus Serbia, which is where we get to see the heavyweight matchup of Jokic versus Jamal Murray. So that should be an interesting game. I know Voya said that Serbia is not good in bronze medal games. So, that wouldn't be great. But I also think that, we talked about Canada's issues with size, but we also talked about the athleticism advantage they may have over Serbia. That could actually be a really interesting matchup. I'm not sure what the Team USA Serbia game would look like. Again, this would be the third time that they play each other in just a few weeks span, because they did play obviously in group play, and before that they played in the exhibitions. But I think that all the same problems for Serbia would crop up. In particular, the athleticism disadvantage and the bench overall. The Germany Canada matchup, I think Germany is just a different tier of team than Canada by a bit, I think, because of the size. But Canada may have an opportunity in the non-Schroeder minutes to take advantage of how kind of gnarly Germany's offense looks with Schroeder off the floor. But he might just play 40 minutes in that game. World Cup Finals MVP Dennis Schroeder is probably not going to let Germany miss an opportunity to get to the finals.
But you'd ultimately then have USA winning the whole thing.
Yes, winning gold.
There's not really a slot on this graphic for a winner, but I'll just put a big American flag right there. Yeah, I was trying to think, because I really want the Canada-Serbia bronze medal game, just because that would be so fun to watch Jamal versus Jokic, and I would love to see them like shaking hands after the game, or like Jokic pulling some kind of prank on Jamal just for that moment. But I would love to see Serbia get the gold medal, somehow upset the United States, but I just don't see it. Canada, now I'm like, could they like just somehow pull a miracle and go to the final? Because SGA just...
I don't think it would be that out of the question. I think
Yeah.
Germany is a better team, but it's not by a lot. It's like a half tier.
Mhm. And in
Like
a
a half
single
step up.
game, anything can kind of happen.
Yeah.
So
Maybe Germany, like I think they have a better offense and shot diet overall than Canada, but maybe they just go cold from three.
yeah, exactly. Like
Or
Canada could just have a really hot game and they just win that game. Could be interesting. Just in case Jamal's watching this, I'm gonna pick Canada.
what? You should pick against him if you want him to be motivated.
I just want him to like me.
I don't know if Jamal likes anybody right now.
I'm picking you, Jamal. I'm picking you
That's
to go to the
interesting. So
final.
I want to ask you then, if we had Canada versus Serbia in the bronze medal game, who would you pick?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. That's a toss-up based on
I
like
know,
what
I
I've
think it's
seen.
an interesting matchup.
Yeah, based on what I've seen from both of these teams, I still feel like Serbia would win. That'd be like my initial gut instinct, is to still go with Serbia in that matchup, just because
I think
of
they'd be
Jokic.
playing really hard in that game to make sure they medaled.
I would think so too. I know Voya said they're bad in bronze medal games, but like, get a medal for Serbia. And Powell and Olynyk against Jokic, like,
Yeah,
I don't know. It's a little rough. I'd probably still
Right.
pick Serbia. And then a Germany-Serbia like bronze medal game somehow. I'd probably still just pick Serbia just because I like Jokic, but that is like another who knows. That really could go anyway.
The matchups get a little bit more, of a toss-up as you get closer to the end, as it should be in a good tournament. Okay, so your prediction is
USA in the gold. How about that for spicy? And then Canada silver medal, and then I'll go Serbia bronze.
all right. And mine is USA gold medal, Germany silver medal, and Serbia bronze.
Right.
So yeah, one of those top 4 teams is going to be left on the outs, at least one.
To wrap up this episode, we wanted to just talk a little bit about Draymond Green and the comments he made, because Kevin Durant and Draymond Green are just out here just giving their opinions left and right, and like, why not react to that? It's the
They're creating
NBA.
so much content for everybody.
Yeah, and I'm gonna love any like Warriors infighting. So Draymond Green on his podcast, of course, was talking about the United States rotation and lineups, and essentially just talking about how he doesn't like the fact that any single player on the United States team has to be relegated to just not playing in a game. So it was Jason Tatum first, then they benched Embiid and started Jason Tatum, and Joel Embiid didn't play in a game. The next time around, against Puerto Rico, Joel Embiid played. I don't know if he started or not, but
I think he did start, but so did Tatum.
Yes, and then Drew Holiday was out.
Right.
So Draymond was just essentially complaining about the fact that the coaches on Team USA hadn't had their lineups and rotations locked in and planned out enough to involve everybody. Draymond Green reminds me kind of like a parent of a middle school team, where he's like, everyone needs the same amount of playing time. I feel like the idea of the Team United States at this Olympics was to bring the firepower and bring the star power and bring the USA back to prominence or whatever. And I think these players didn't really care about how they were going to win. They just wanted to be there just to say, like, hey, my services are available. At least that's my interpretation. Other
Or at
people can
least
disagree
I
with
think
me.
that's how they would like to think of
Yeah,
themselves, right?
true. Whether or not they actually do is another question, but that was like the idea. But their basketball games may not be dramatic because they're winning them pretty convincingly for the most part. But there's been all this drama and discussion with just like, who are you going to start? Who are you going to bench? So we still have these debates about who's bench one, cut one, start one, the whole like meme that's always online, but it's happening in real time.
I know, right? I didn't even think. Wait, so let's look at the guards. Basically, we have Booker, Ant, and Halliburton.
I guess
Start bench
they're cutting
cuts.
Tyrese, starting Booker.
Oh man, that's a really good point.
So that's what we're seeing, and
Wait, Kerr is actually playing bench cut IRL. That's so funny.
that's what's happening. That's the only interesting thing that's going on with Team USA in this Olympics, I would say. My reaction to that is just, you guys just shut up and just let them do what they do. You're winning every game. Why are you complaining?
Will Jones to NBA players, shut up and dribble.
Just shut up and dribble and win the gold. Maybe he did screw up by not playing Jason Tatum. I guess he admitted that and apologized to him or whatever. But I don't know what Jason Tatum really thinks. I wouldn't be surprised if he just was like, oh, whatever, it's fine.
Oh, you know what Tatum thinks? Because in the beginning of that Draymond clip, he said, I had to tell JT it doesn't matter
right.
how many minutes you're playing, whether you get, DNP to game, whatever. So you know that was in response to something that Tatum had told him about probably his feelings on the matter, right?
Yeah.
And we'd had the other quotes from Tatum that came out after it was that first game in pool play versus Serbia where he got a DNP, right? He talked about the post championship, and he's got the 2K cover and all of that. And he's like, actually, it's been a really humbling experience.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, oh, I thought you were going to talk about how yeah, once you win a championship, like it doesn't matter what anyone says, blah, blah, blah. But no, it was about the humbling experience. And I think that shows how for Tatum in particular, but it wouldn't surprise me at all for any of these guys, especially the younger ones, that they care about their public perception. Like they care about their image, right? This is something that's been particularly a narrative with the Boston Celtics and with the Jays in particular. We talked earlier about Jaylen Brown feeling snubbed for being off of Team USA in favor of Derek White as the Kawhi replacement, but not just the Celtics, but these two guys in particular being the example. This like ongoing like conflict publicly about like who gets the most credit, who's the best player, this or that. This feels like a little bit of an extension of that, but it's not. I don't think that it's an uncommon sentiment in the NBA, such a star-driven league, right? The thing that for context for the audience, Team USA is 12 players. That's how many you're allowed to have on your roster in the Olympics. There are some teams that were still making cuts like up until like a couple days before the games started. Team Serbia had 16 guys on their roster and they needed to, winnow that down. For reference, in say a regular season NBA game, a 10-man rotation is kind of like the limit. Like that's what you would do in the regular season, particularly at the beginning of the season. Closer you get to the playoffs, the shorter the rotations get, 9 players, sometimes 8 if you're like testing out your tight like 8-man playoff rotation. So the fact that Draymond effectively in this clip said that it was just unacceptable that Team USA was only playing a 10-man rotation in any one of these games, I think makes no sense. Like you said, you kind of referenced with some Warriors infighting. I thought it was kind of a shitty like position for him to put Steve Kerr in, especially after, like you said, Kerr has already come out and sort of apologized. I don't know if that means that he's sorry or if it's because he's good at managing player relationships. That's something that has been, whether you like Steve Kerr and you think it's a strength of his, or you're a fan of the Warriors who was very upset with this past season, that this is kind of the tact that Kerr will play. Like he's actually the guy that, you know, started Klay Thompson for most of the season, even through intense struggles that Klay was having on both ends of the court because of that very principle. So the fact that Draymond is criticizing the Team USA coaching staff, but it's directed at Kerr. He's the head coach. Ultimately, these decisions are his. Is just kind of rich and also perhaps in my opinion maybe unfounded because like to me Kerr has gone out of his way in the past in the way that he coaches the Warriors and even in how he's gone with Team USA to try to make sure that everybody does feel included and blah blah blah. He went on to criticize the fact that the coaching staff had guys taking turns being DNPs because it's like, well, now they're just like covering their tracks. Like it was okay for JT to not play in the first place. He's like, no, everybody should play basically every game, effectively demanding at least an 11-man rotation. And if I don't know if Draymond, I don't remember if he explicitly called out the fact that Halliburton hasn't played in any of these games. I don't know if he's advocating for Halliburton to also be part of the regular Olympic rotation as well, and calling for a 12-man rotation, but he's calling for at least an 11-man one. And he even said in that clip, he's like, Tatum, yeah, he played terribly during the exhibition games, but it doesn't matter. This, that, and the other. There are some other things I want to discuss, but yeah, what do you just think of Draymond sort of not realizing how like a little bit ridiculous what he's asking for is, and the fact that he's like going out of his way to critique the coaching staff for this logistic choice, basically?
I mean, Draymond has relationships with a lot of these dudes, so I'm like,
Yeah,
of course he's
that's
going to
true.
be on their side. But Kerr is also his coach. I wouldn't be surprised if their relationship's a little bit strained through everything that they've gone through. But it is a little bit
Or
annoying
if
to
he feels
me.
like he can say anything because it is his coach, and
Yeah, maybe that.
like, sometimes you're maybe less forgiving for the people you're closest to because like they can handle it. Like they've heard all of this kind of stuff from me before, whatever it is.
That could be. And then, like, but Kerr's come out and defended Draymond through so much of
Numerous
his
occasions
career. And
on
now,
including
yeah,
last year when he went through, what was it, a 12-game suspension? I mean, for everything, because it was an accumulation of acts throughout the first half of the year, right?
yeah. I mean, I do think Kerr and even Steph said some stuff about Draymond that was, wasn't like they were defending the Nurkic incident.
They're like, he knows he
Yeah,
needs to be better, right? The stuff
yeah,
that you kind of have to say once it escalates to that point. But before
exactly.
that, it was like,
Yep.
see no evil,
Yeah.
basically. Like Kerr has been labeled a Draymond apologist in the past. And the fact that Draymond's kind of going after him this hard is just sort
hmm
of, from a million miles away. Like he's not part of the situation. He's not on Team USA. He is advocating for, like you say, his friends
Yeah.
that are on the team. All these guys know each other.
Yeah, and
Um,
they're just lucky Jordan Poole isn't like really, really good because they chose the dude who punched Jordan Poole over him.
that's true.
He also had some little comment about how Kevin Durant had passed the torch to Tatum.
Or that it was
Regards,
supposed to be like that.
yeah, regards to the national team. Kevin Durant's still playing better than Jason Tatum in this tournament, so it's like funny. Draymond just says what he wants to say, and that's part of like his charm and the appeal of his podcast, I guess. So it's like I don't expect him to hold back, but yeah, I don't know how much you can really criticize Kerr. The games are already shortened as it is, so like getting a
Yeah, it's a
12-man
40-minute
rotation.
game. Like the game is shorter. It actually doesn't make that much sense to have a 10-man rotation even like
Yeah.
they've had, but they've, had the margin for error they have because they are, Team USA with all of these guys that are going to be
hmm
probably Hall of Famers and all that.
Is there something to be said about chemistry with the lineups and not like subbing guys out too
Right.
much, stuff like that?
Exactly. Like things get choppier. That's part of the logistic, uh, you know, like challenge that the Team USA coaches have. I think every other national team has guys that they're like, yeah, this guy definitely probably shouldn't play maybe in any of the games. But Team USA has a lot of guys that can play and can make an impact. So they have decisions to make. There was just one more section of this clip from Draymond that I wanted to respond to where he's kind of, working off of this point that they should be playing all of their guys and they should have set rotations where I don't know if everyone's playing like 4 or 5 minute stints or what it is that he's asking for here. But basically saying like, I don't want to hear the excuse of, we're trying to create lineups to like match other teams and, like
Mm.
that kind of thing. He's like, I don't want to hear that excuse because we should have our lineups and they should be trying to match our lineups because we're like so much more superior than the other, teams here. And he might be right about this to an extent, but I will say that I don't think players are like an individual player is necessarily like the best judge of like overall team quality between teams. And maybe the fact that he said this as a critique of Team USA tells you a little bit about how seriously the Team USA coaching staff is taking these other teams. Like we saw when they played Team Serbia in um both in the exhibition and in their group play game, unlike really the other games that were like close and everyone's like, oh my God, is Team USA not as good as we think, or like, what are they going to blow it, whatever. But when they play Team Serbia, like they take that game very seriously. And that is not just like how the players are playing, but how the coaches are arranging lineups. And the coaching staff is doing this for every team, right? Like they decide to start Embiid again versus Puerto Rico, a tiny team. He can definitely dominate, even though, he scored like, what was it, 14 points and 15 shots or the other way around versus Puerto Rico, but we don't have to linger on that. The point is that it implies that the coaching staff is actually taking the challenge that these other international teams are presenting to Team USA very seriously and like not taking their opponent lightly. I guess thanks Draymond for helping us as the audience realize how much respect the Team USA coaching staff has for the international field, at least in comparison to you or in contrast to you.
I mean, I don't even know if each particular benching of Tatum, Embiid, and Drew has a good argument for them to be benched for that specific team that they were playing or not.
Right. Honestly, like Embiid should have been benched from Serbia, and he kind of was, right? Like he played 11 minutes in that game as a starter, less than I think almost anybody on the
Yeah.
entire team, let
Yeah.
alone the other starters. But in terms of just like being a DNP, I don't think it made sense to bench Tatum, but I think it was like you talked about this in our last episode, I think, or maybe it was in the Olympic preview where you said, oh, no, it must have been the last episode because it doesn't make sense for Tatum to not play in that game because of Serbia's size. But Embiid, and we talked about this, maybe there's a possibility that he was promised that he would start, which is the only way that would have made sense. But then he gets DNP'd in that next game, and then he starts again versus Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
even though he's been having a really kind of miserable by his standards Olympics. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you think about
In
that?
that regard, it's just kind of like Draymond does have somewhat of a point where it does look a little bit silly, like they're covering their tracks doing the rotating DNPs, like it's your turn now, which maybe is just what they should be doing.
And maybe it doesn't matter at all because they
Yeah.
have so much bigger of a margin for error than any other team here.
Yeah, that's
So
the other thing. It's kind of nitpicky. Like, as long as you are winning the games, why are we really criticizing them? But, you got to put something out, got to create some buzz somehow.
I mean, that's kind of what we're doing, right? Because Draymond's basically saying that. He's like, we have so much margin for error anyway. Like everyone should just be playing because this man just won an NBA championship, this Jason Tatum. Whereas, the Team USA coaching staff is like, let's at least try, whether you agree with them or not. Because Kerr loves his 3-guard lineups, but he thinks that's the best way for the starters to play when he decides to bench Tatum in a game
Yeah.
and have
Yeah.
Drew start, right? That's the other, implication there. Clearly he's like trying to construct like a coherent team because he's like, well, I don't want to like take chances against these good international teams. But
There's a point to be made and to criticize Kerr and the Jason Tatum benching. I just think Draymond didn't
right.
really make it that well. So,
Exactly. I agree with that. You could go like the Jason Timpf route and talk about exactly what I just said, which is like, but Serbia's like one of the biggest teams in the entire tournament, and you decided to go 3-guard lineup to start. And actually, those starters were not winning those minutes, right? We talked about how Jokic was able to play them even in his minutes, and then it was the bench, that got destroyed.
right.
So that's, that tells you something about how effective that particular strategy was. But Draymond's critique has nothing to do with what Team USA should be doing to, be better and like win these games. He's just saying like, just throw guys out there. Everybody should play.
We're coming to the end of the Olympics. This is all going to be over pretty quick, but we're getting to exciting knockout round, high stakes games. So please stick with us through that. We're also going to be doing a off season and conclusion where we might do some grades. So look forward to that in the future. And then we'll also do an episode about the NBA schedule when that's released, which we don't know when that is exactly, but it is going to be soon. Just keep an eye out for all that. Please subscribe so that you do not miss any of those. We're almost to 500 subscribers. So to those of you who've already subscribed, thank you so much. We love you. And if you haven't yet, please consider doing so. And like the video if you're watching, send our episodes to your friends and tell everyone about it. We really appreciate you guys listening and commenting. Let us know what you think about the Draymond Green comments and whether or not Kerr is making the right decisions with the rotations and who you think might win the tournament if it's not the USA. Yeah, thank you so much for listening. And remember that winning is fun and losing sucks.
Big time.